Hi, I'm Gordon Raquel from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. Learn more at filmmakeru.com and follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u and on our Filmmaker U YouTube channel. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and check the notification bell for our weekly videos. Every week, we interview film professionals to discuss their work, and this is made possible by our sponsors, OWC. For more information on how they can assist you in filmmaking needs, go to owcdigital.com. This week, I'm joined by supervising sound editor and re-recording mixer Ryan Billia, whose work includes stuff for the 30 for 30. You did a film Superior, Bulletproof, among so many other projects. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
I guess can you tell us how you got into sound and into this industry?
Sure. So, my background early on, I played music. I was a drummer in some bands. I was living in San Francisco. I DJ'd in clubs. I played house parties. I kind of was very involved in sound. And I was working in a music school in San Francisco. And I was sort of in my early mid 20s at this point. I hadn't gone to college and kind of started thinking, maybe I should go to school and whatnot. And a lot of the teachers at the music school had gone to Berklee College of Music in Boston. And while I was playing in bands, I loved working in studios, even sometimes more than the performing part. I liked, playing with mics and layering sounds and mixing and just kind of playing with and developing sound. I really got into that. And Berklee has a really well-known production and engineering program. And so I ended up going to Berklee around, I was 25. So that was in early 2000s, 2003 or 4, something like that. And I dual majored in production and engineering, which was really geared towards making records. So producing songwriters and bands and the engineering side of all that. But I also was a dual major in what used to be called music synth, now is called electronic music production, which was very much computer music and sound design, even some programming, installation work, all of that. And so, while I was in school, I always thought, okay, I want to make records. But I started taking a lot of classes on post, sound for picture kind of is how they called it. And I felt that it really was a kind of a perfect blending of all my loves. Like I love capturing good sound. I love mixing. I love all of that, but I also love sort of creating new sounds, for narrative reasons or also just interesting sound. So that dual major kind of worked really well. And so when I graduated, my then girlfriend, now wife, had really wanted to move to New York. I'm sort of from here. So I was like, okay, I guess I can move back to New York. And so we moved to New York and I got my first job working for a company that did mostly like promos and ad work for MTV and VH1 and stuff like that. And it was a lot of fun because it was every day. I would do sometimes 1 or 2 spots. It was very sound design heavy, a lot of those sort of promos like whooshes and booms and, a lot of high energy stuff. And we would do VO records every day. We would do ISDN connections to famous VO talent in California. And so it was really a crash course in kind of high speed audio post. And then I segued to another company, which also did a lot of advertising. And also we did some reality television mixing, kind of a little bit more diverse stuff. And, I always wanted to and envisioned myself kind of working in film. And the New York film scene is a pretty small, tight-knit community as compared to LA and stuff like that. And so, while I was at this other studio, I started thinking, maybe I'm just going to go off and try to build my own thing or kind of do my own, venture into film sound. And so I built a studio in Brooklyn that I had for about 8 years and to focus exclusively on indie film. I loved working with first-time directors and indie film in the classic sense of indie film. And so I did that for about 8 years and built up there, working on a lot of really cool projects, a lot of festival films, and yeah, and so then towards the end of that, I had worked a lot with Harbor.
How would you describe the role of the re-recording mixer? Because I feel like a lot of people know about the mixer's role and what the mixer does, but they might not be aware of what a re-recording mixer does.
So, the term re-recording comes from the fact that the sound in a film has been already recorded once. So what the re-record mixer is re-recording previously recorded audio. So all of that previously recorded audio was dialogue on set, score, and it's kind of, I don't want to say an antiquated term, but it's the term that's just kind of carried through the industry for a long time. And back when mixers were working with only a handful of channels, they would have a bunch of mag reels in a back room running film, and they would be balancing and re-recording that previously recorded pre-dubs of music, pre-dubs of dialogue, pre-dubs of sound design. So that's sort of carried over. Obviously now, because of digital, we have, you know, track counts are going into the thousands and thousands, and it is technically still re-recording previously recorded audio. So generally in film, when you refer to the sound mixer is the person that's recording sound on set. So they're the production sound mixer. And then you have ADR mixers, Foley mixers, and they are actually the ones who are recording Foley and ADR. And then you have the re-recording mixer, who then re-records all of that previously recorded sound. So yeah, that's kind of how that term kind of came into play.
So it seems like one of the challenges would be, does the ADR mixer then make sure that the ADR sounds like the rest of the film, or would that be your role?
It's twofold. Ideally, the ADR mixer, the ADR mixer is definitely doing their best to balance. So they try to use the same mic or the same style of microphone that was used on set. They try to get a good distance off the mic comparatively. It's always, the room should be pretty dead, meaning not really reverberant. So yeah, they really do a lot to capture and mix the sound as best they can. And then when it gets to me is where I'll add a little bit more of that sort of flavor on top, more reverb to kind of place it in a space. Sometimes I even will crunch it up and distort the audio a little bit more, to kind of dirty it up a little bit, so to speak. So yeah, ideally we're getting pretty close tracks from the ADR mixer, and then we're just sort of adding that extra little sheen. I always say to ADR people, if they go into an ADR studio and they're using a really nice microphone like this, which is like a voiceover mic, it's never going to match production sound, because it's too good sounding. And it's, these microphones are used for voiceover, they're used for animation, but not really for capturing actual dialogue on set.
So what are some of the challenges that you would face as a re-recording mixer that, can be, I guess you could suggest, could be fixed on set or in other previously thought out approaches, I guess, to filmmaking?
Yeah, it's really tough. When I find production tracks that sound really good, I always want to find out who the sound mixer was, so that I can recommend them to other shows, and compliment them, because they're working in extremely difficult circumstances, especially on, indie films, micro budget and low budget projects, because they just don't have the time to prep. They can't stop traffic. Sometimes they're not able to do all the treatments that they do. A lot of bigger productions will put, if say it's in a house, and they'll lay padding everywhere on the floor, so that as people are walking around, you're not hearing clicking and clacking on feet. Sometimes actors won't wear shoes, so that they, there's a lot of things that they're doing to try to minimize extraneous sounds. But on a lot of sort of smaller budget projects, that's just not possible. Or you're not able to, stop for sound, like because there's a plane flying over or something like that. I always say that a really good production sound mixer is somebody who's willing to say, hold on, I'm sorry, we need to fix this. Like, this is just not sounding good. Because I find that directors will, they'll hold for camera, they'll hold for lighting, but holding for sound is like, oh God, we got to hold for sound. But, if you don't capture great sound, it's really difficult. Of course, we do ADR, we do Foley. There's so many tools, digital tools we have now to clean up noise and things like that. But when I get a really good sounding film that's captured really well, it just makes my job a lot easier. And I think the director's happier because they've spent so much time working with the actors in the edit. They're capturing the exact performance they want. The actors, got into a really serious headspace for this performance. And if it sounds like then we got to get them into an ADR booth and say, okay, remember 8 months ago or a year ago how you felt? Okay, get there now and let's do 3 takes and then move on. So yeah, it's tough. I mean, I used to really hate doing ADR, but I actually like it now. I find that it some actors really like it because it opens up more opportunities for them, and it gives sort of directors like one more shot to maybe improve the scene a little bit more and stuff. So ADR isn't as scary as some people kind of think it is. And it's almost every film. I would say every film I work on has at least some ADR in it.
What are some of the tricks then in ADR to make it sound more realistic? Like you mentioned the choosing similar mics or the same mic if possible. Mm-hmm. What are some of the other things you've learned?
I mean, I always say 80% of good ADR comes down to the actor and the performance. If their voice isn't matching production and their energy level isn't matching production, there's no plugin or tool that I can do that's gonna make that match. Of course, that last 20% or 15% is huge, but it really comes down to the performance. So giving the actor an opportunity to kind of get into that headspace in the booth, do a couple dry runs, which every good ADR mixer records every take, even if it's like, oh, let's just do a practice. And they're always rolling because very often that first one is the keeper. And then they'll say, well, try it again. And then they get a little into a head, or it becomes a little robotic or something like that. In sync, kind of just like anything else in a film, as viewers, if sound is tightly sunk to the image, most audiences believe that that's the sound. So when I do sound design or with Foley, like very often with Foley, it's not the exact object making that sound, but if it's sunk up in a way that works and seems really tight, the audience is like, yeah, that's that sound. So same thing with ADR. If lip sync is a little loose, even if the sound is perfect, it's just not going to be right. Whereas if the lip sync is really tight and the performance seems good, and then the ambience and world is balanced on both sides, it can go fly by without anybody ever knowing. With that said, every director and every actor will know it's ADR because they know it's ADR. It's so hard to forget what was there before, but an audience, they'll never know. So the best they can, but I would say, yeah, really the bulk of it comes down to what is captured in the booth. So proper microphone, proper location, and then that the performance and the actor's in a good place. If the actor has a cold that day, I've had actors come in and they kind of have a bit of a raspy voice or something. I'm thinking, this is just not going to work. I mean, we can't. I mean, we can try and see how it goes, but if they have a little cold or something, it's just not going to happen. So, yeah.
Now, you've done a lot of documentary work as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a sound designer, how do you find that balance between, adding sound and filling out the world, but also staying true to the reality of a doc?
It's a really good question, because I think a lot of that really does come down to the director's vision for the film, because, some documentaries are truly verite, and others have a lot more exploration in sound, and things like that. So a lot really comes to that, like what's their sort of vision for it. But, if I can capture sound in that location, like I've got a rig that I'll go out and record ambiances and places and things like that. Obviously, if this is a documentary that's taking place in, Eastern Europe right now. I'm not going to get on a plane and fly to Eastern Europe to capture. It'd be great if I could, but it's not something that I'm always going to have an opportunity to do. So I try to, when I'm sound designing, when I'm doing my ambience pass, whether it's a documentary or a narrative film, I always have like Wikipedia open of birds of that location, or things like that, so that I'm always kind of trying to be as close as I can to what's captured in there. But I've done a few documentaries. You mentioned that film Bullet, which has a lot of sort of subjective sound work done it. It's about school shootings. It's a very heavy topic, but in particular, it wasn't, we were capturing a lot of interesting sound, but we were building a lot of subjective droning sounds, and a lot of it was also dealing with surveillance, and so we were kind of tying in a lot of computerized boops and bleeps and things like that just sort of helped to support the narrative of what the director was trying to explain. So yeah, really a lot of it is through numerous conversations and back and forths with the director and producers, for sure.
Now, I've asked this of editors, but I've never asked this of a sound person. Documentaries, especially heavy ones, things like Bullet, how do you, I guess, separate yourself, or because you're going to spend many, many hours with the content and it could be really heavy. So, how do you, I guess, keep yourself from becoming too depressed or down when you're working with something that could be really heavy and depressing?
Yeah, it's also a really good question, because I did another documentary a couple years ago that was about this musical artist, Little Peep. He's like a SoundCloud rapper who died of a drug overdose at 21. And his parents, his mother and grandfather, were really open about giving home footage, because he was 21, so he grew up in a social media world. So there was a lot of content of him on his phone rapping, as well as a little kid. While I was working on it, I have a son that was probably about the same age as him during a lot of these scenes. And I would pretty much be sobbing in the room at times when I was working. And some days I could get through it, and other days I would cry. There's footage of him, which is all over social media. That was when he actually died, he was at a party, and people were live streaming it. And there he is sitting dead on a couch. They didn't realize. And so you're watching this footage. I mean, it's extremely heavy. And so part of me also feels like we weren't doing our job if it wasn't affecting us every time. We wanted to be affected every time. I mean, every time we would do playback of that particular reel, which also has like a 911 recording of them calling and saying, please send somebody, he's not breathing, which I, did this sort of interesting effect with his voice where I sort of spread it throughout the theater. And so it wasn't really coming from one specific location. It was coming from everywhere in the theater, so that no matter where you were sitting, you couldn't get away from it. That was sort of the concept, was, we didn't want people to sort of want to pull away from the screen, because if they pulled away, it was coming from behind them. It was coming from everywhere, just to sort of put the weight on the audience about what was happening. And yeah, so if we weren't getting affected by it every time, then we didn't feel like we were doing the right thing. And obviously I'd go home, I'd hug my kids, I'd talk about it with my wife, and and you just go in and do it the next day. You can't completely desensitize yourself from it. With that said, if you've watched it 30 times, you do desensitize yourself from it. Same thing if you work on a horror film. I get very jumpy when I watch horror films. And, after that first jump, I stop jumping, because I know it's coming and stuff like that. But then as I'm sound designing, I want to add some more stuff that makes me jump again, so you want to keep that going. So I think picture editors and try to keep doing that as well. Like they want to keep inspiring themselves, or not inspiring, but keep them on edge a little bit. So yeah.
Well, I talked to a sound designer years ago who worked on horror films almost exclusively, and I asked them how they got through it, and they said, well, we're the ones adding the stuff that makes people scared. So
Totally.
they said when you listen to the raw audio, it's like screaming, and it's like, was that good?
Yeah.
Like beats
Yeah,
afterwards,
totally.
and they say it's actually really easy after a bit because it's like, it completely removes you from the reality of the film all of a sudden.
Totally. Yeah. You'll hear the director do things like in the background, they'll go bang, or they'll like do hit so that they know to jump or something
Yeah.
like that. And it actually makes it almost comical at that
Yeah.
point. So yeah, I would agree. It is, so much in horror film, a lot of those jump things are sound related. So we are bringing those things in. So if we can achieve in scaring ourselves, that's actually pretty impressive, I would say.
So how do you approach developing a sound design for a horror film then to make us scared and jump?
Yeah, I mean, I've only done a handful of horror films. It's definitely not the genre that I've worked in the most. But so in horror films that I like, so I would say maybe I'll turn the question around into like what sort of turns me on when it comes to horror films. Like gore sounds are great, like those just kind of raw and breaking sounds. For me, it's those unnerving sort of pitched and frequency sounds that kind of make the hairs on your neck sort of creep up. So even in a film like Bulletproof, like that, we dealt with that, the documentary about the school shootings, like some of that sort of computer sort of surveillance stuff, we were getting these really high frequency rings. So it was just not to hurt people. Like we didn't want to hurt them, but we wanted them to just feel a little uncomfortable with the content, and thus like how they were feeling in the space. So on any film, but definitely on a horror film, I think you sort of try to build these ramps of sound to certain hits, and then focus on whatever that hit is, whatever it's a stinger or it's not, but like whatever that big hit is, kind of build that up. And that's usually in a horror film where you've got the gory stuff and like splatters and bone breaks and crunches and all that kind of fun gross stuff. But again, like that's the stuff that kind of turns your stomach a little bit. For me, like what really makes people uncomfortable is that those sort of unnerving sounds that's building you to something. Yeah.
Now, is there a scene or a sound design moment in your career that you're most proud of, or that was really challenging for you?
So yeah, I mean, there was a film that I did a couple years ago called The Climb, which was directed by Michael Angelo Covino, and co-written with his good friend Kyle Marvin. And it's sort of loosely based on their actual friendship. It's basically two guys' friendship over many, many years. And what's sort of interesting about the film is it's broken up into a series, I think it's 7 chapters or 9 chapters. And each chapter is a oneer, so it's just one long take. And so the camera is sort of weaving through whatever this environment is, while almost always these two guys are having some conversation or struggle in their relationship. And there's 2 scenes that are kind of back to back, which is a Thanksgiving and Christmas scene, um, um, at Mike's family's house. And the first one, the Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving one is inside the house. So you kind of enter into the house, and then the camera sort of winds through this home, and there's, his parents and cousins and sisters. There's everybody there. And so everything is constantly sort of spinning around your head. Bits of sound are coming into the frame and leaving the frame. So we did a ton of ADR, and a lot of Foley work and stuff. So it's extremely objective in terms of its soundscape, but it's also subjective in that we were trying to use sounds that was helping to push the narrative forward. So it's it's an interesting balance in that we wanted to have some interesting sound design. But most importantly, it was like, is this sort of true to the space? Are the sounds, is that voice coming from the right? And as it's coming around, it's moving around us this way and going behind us this way, which was really cool. And then so after Thanksgiving, it becomes Christmas, and it does the same thing, but it goes around the outside of the house. So you're looking through the windows into the house. So that time it's more of the ambience that's going around our heads, wind and snow and some dog barks and things like that. And then it's voices that are sort of appearing in the window frame and then leaving the window frame. It was really a lot of fun. It was hard. It was a really hard mix, because it's just, we're talking about minuscule little shifts in volume and panning and trying to keep things feeling real, reverb building up as a person would walk away and things like that. But when we finally felt like we got it and we watched it, it was like, yeah, this is exactly what what the directors in particular really, really wanted, which was great. So that one is one of the first ones that always comes to mind. And then another film that I did that went to Sundance this year, called Lutsu, which was actually a Maltese film. So, one difficult part was it was all shot in Maltese. So I'm reading subtitles the whole time. But it's a really beautiful film about traditional fisherman, who sort of has to deal with some struggles while he has a newborn baby and his wife. And the film is being released now, but the opening of the film sort of establishes a little bit about this character, and it's all in this boat, which is called a lutsu. It's a traditional fishing boat in Malta. And, it's just this man alone on this boat. And so a lot of it was sort of figuring out the sound of this boat, how it was sort of slapping on the water, emphasizing his sort of not loneliness, but solitude on this water. And the fact that, he's on this boat that's maybe 20 feet long, no real coverage, and he's on it for 3 or 4 days at a time while he's out fishing, and then brings it back, and the water sort of slapping on the underside. So with the director, we really worked a lot on this subjective objective thing. Like, we wanted it to feel real, but we were really trying to emphasize giving this boat a real sound, so it was distinctive. And he really complimented me by saying, the director, by saying, the boat really sings now. Like, it actually has this tonal sound as it's sort of bounding over these waves. So that film, the whole film in general, was really an amazing experience. And the filmmaker's name is Alex Camilleri, and it's really worth seeing. I think it's a really beautiful, beautiful project.
Now, I have one last question for you. We've been stuck in the pandemic for a year and a bit now, and a lot of people have sort of taken to streaming TV shows and movies through the various streaming platforms. Is there a show or movie you discovered over the last year that people should check out?
So, there's so many shows that my wife and I watch. We watch a lot of series. I kind of like watching a lot of series. When I'm working on a movie, I have a tendency to not want to watch movies, because I feel like if I'm watching a film while I'm working on a film, or I watch a lot of documentaries if I'm working on a narrative, or vice versa, I don't want it to overly influence how I'm working. So we watch a lot of episodes of things. We more recently were watching Dave, which is this really hilarious and wonderful and weird show on Hulu, which really, really love. And also Hacks, which a lot of people really like, which was really, really good. I, definitely, like, I have a tendency to which is terrible, and I'm trying not to do it anymore. But if I can't sleep at night, I have a tendency to pull out my phone, as a lot of us do, and stream stuff. And that's when I go to like my old sort of standbys and watch things like Star Trek or South Park or anything like that, because it's sort of comforting. But yeah, a lot of episodic sort of things, but those are definitely two that I'm currently watching that sort of come to mind. We also try to, films that sort of won awards or won accolades that maybe we weren't able to see because they're playing at a festival, like that documentary Collective, which was about I think it's Romania, and this fire that happened in a Romanian nightclub, and sort of the fallout from that within the government. And it's kind of an incredible piece. It's very verite, because it's basically capturing, but you almost feel like, I don't know how they were able to capture this footage, meaning like they're sitting in these rooms with high-ranking government officials and things like that. And so, that one's a very heavy film. So yeah, the wonderful thing about streaming platforms is that you do have opportunities to see a lot of things that maybe you weren't able to see before. Same thing with Criterion. I've been a Criterion fan forever and have the Criterion channel. And so if I really feel like I need to see something that film students talk about, or some an Ingmar Bergman film or something like that. I feel like, oh, I've never seen that one, I feel like I should see it. It's there and it's available to see. So yeah, I think that's kind of one of the bigger benefits. I do miss the theatrical experience. I think for sound people in particular, you know, nothing beats being in a dark room with people and hearing how it's supposed to sound, how it's supposed to fully envelop you. And I that's the one thing that I feel like streaming, you lose a little bit on the sound side. That said, if the sound is good, it carries through, whether you're watching on your laptop or you're watching it in a theater or you're watching it in Atmos or something like that. But I try to, look forward to the opportunities to go to the theater again. So
it's funny because you talked about like South Park or what have you being your comfort food. And mine, for whatever reason, the last while has been MASH. Rewatching the old MASH, and it's so weird to like watch these old shows that are just like they still hold up.
They still, well, MASH in particular. Actually, similar to that, I watch a lot of Cheers.
I watched the whole series like 2 years ago again.
Well, because they were really good at figuring out these universals, universals that anybody can sort of relate to character-wise and stuff like that. And these 3-camera shows, they're few and far between now. There's not a lot of people doing them, and I think it's an interesting format. It'd be fun to see if it comes back in that sort of way a little bit, but yeah, they're good. I mean, MASH is, my dad was in the Army, so I grew up with MASH. I mean, for sure.
Same. My dad was a medic in the Army, and he was like,
oh, it was oh, so yeah.
He was like, it's the closest to reality, and I was like,
it's real, it's true. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview.
No, thank you. It was really great. I really appreciate it.
So that's our show for today. Be sure to subscribe to our Twitter handle at filmmaker_u. Make sure to check off subscribe on YouTube and hit the notification bell to get our weekly updates. And again, check out our sponsors, OWC at owcdigital.com. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.